Globally, more CEOs are understanding the need to act. Many of you are in this room right now. Additionally, they are emphasizing stakeholder value and social impact over shareholder primacy and short-term growth. To discuss how businesses can be a platform for social change while continuing to be innovative, can't get away from that word this morning, competitive, and of course on a path towards significant growth, please welcome Paul Polman with Fortune's Alan Murray.
Paul, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You have talked about the need to reimagine capitalism, and you've created a company to help do that. Imagine. Hat tip to John Lennon, is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you tell us about Imagine and what you're trying to accomplish?
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
I think you have a room full.
I have a room for that.
You should start singing that, though.
No, that would be, I don't think the room will stay full. So where we are, the reason that we started creating Imagine is a very simple one. Having worked for Unilever, I actually, in my 10-year tenure, which I enjoyed tremendously, but I would have been bored after 5 years probably if I could not use the last 5 years to use the size and scale of a company like that to drive transformative change. Getting into your value chain, using the fact that you reach 190 countries or 3 billion consumers a day to really work with governments, NGOs, others in the industry to drive this transformative change. But there comes a point that the limitations of being a CEO are getting in the way to drive bigger change. Competitors might not want to work with you if you have your initiative. Some of these things might be too big to do alone. You don't have the resources to do it, and some other of these boundaries that we face. So after 10 years, I decided with Valerie Keller, who is here, and my co-founder, we decided to, what will it really take to drive more transformative change around the development agendas? If you see where we are globally, you could argue that most people understand what needs to be done. We need to solve inequality, we need to solve climate change, we need to live within the planetary boundaries. So these issues are very well understood and most CEOs get it, yet collectively we're not getting to it at the speed and scale that is needed. So we are not focused anymore on convincing people what needs to be done. We're entirely focusing with Imagine on the scale and speed of these changes. We use the Sustainable Development Goals that you might be familiar with, the famous 17 goals that the UN came out with in September 2015 to irreversibly eradicate poverty, do that in a more sustainable, equitable way. We use that as a guideline. We focus on climate change and income inequality, which are the most important things that need to be addressed. Our theory of change is very simple. When it's difficult for governments to function, which is what we see right now, a difficult time for global governance, yet most of these issues are becoming global. We focus on the CEOs. We think if we can rally a critical mass of a value chain together by industry sector. In our case, for example, you take the fashion industry, or you take tourism and travel, or you take the food and land use systems, all systems that have tremendous impact on the global development agenda. We bring the CEOs together, about 25 to 30% of that industry, put them in a room if you want to, and work with them on courageous collective targets. Move more of the areas to what we would call pre-competitive. Work on the courage of the CEOs and work on the collective action of the industry.
But tell me how that works, because a lot of these companies may be using their environmental issues or progress or accomplishments as a differentiator, as a way to compete in the marketplace. And you're talking about bringing the competitors in a room to work together. Do they want to do that?
Because what CEOs discover is that there are many of the issues that really need to be addressed that simply can't be done alone. Even with Unilever, we obviously we're a big user of palm oil, but to change the whole palm oil industry and make that sustainable palm oil, we can't do it on your own. So many of these areas, if you want to change to green energy, we put all the Dutch companies together and they wanted to change to green energy. None of them can do that alone, but combined, they can actually set up a green energy facility, which is cheaper and better. You take the issues of plastic in the oceans, which is a typically burning issue right now, where consumers are running well ahead of the industry. No individual company can set up a decent recycling system. But if you go together as a critical mass, often in a sector itself, you can address these issues.
Are they willing to work together?
Oh, absolutely, because it's immediate economic benefit right now, because what we're finding in many of these areas is that the cost of not acting is starting to be higher than the cost of acting. So the fashion industry we brought together, what people don't realize, including some in the fashion industry themselves, is that after fossil fuel, they are the second most polluting industry in the world. The problem is everybody is doing something, you know, how to be better with the models you use, no anorexia, how to get out of fur, how to use natural dyes. You can take any fashion company and look in their annual report and they understand that they need to do something. But collectively, that industry is not adding up. The fast fashion is growing so fast, the upcoming middle class, the need that we have to have more clothes at home than ever before makes that the imprint that industry has on society is devastating. You take cotton as an example. The way cotton is produced has a tremendous burden on the water usage in this world, when most of the world is actually soon short of water. So the industry getting together and then saying, how can we create a regenerative cotton production and in a more sustainable way is very attractive to them. The industry coming together and saying collectively what can we do to stay within the Paris agreements or the 1.5 degrees is very attractive to them. Getting out of single-use plastics, even when you might say, oh, just drop the little bottle or the straw.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that in the future, but this is the last warning is okay. So if for an industry to change the way that clothes are being shipped to stores, how the packaging works, if you can do that collectively, these are areas where they are really not decisive for consumers to choose your brands. You move it to a better platform, you all benefit from that.
You said that sustainability, climate, and inequality are your two goals. I mean, we're sitting here on the 1-year anniversary of the Yellow Vest movement,
yes.
which was provoked by an effort to address climate, a gas tax, and the protesters say that was a problem in terms of inequality. Do the two conflict?
No, not at all. I think what you saw there was a little bit of a straw that broke the camel's back. So I don't think the origins is in a increase in the diesel tax, which would be a little simple. But right now, what you basically see is in about 15 countries in the world, as we sit here, people are on the streets making their voices heard, be it in Chile, or be it in Bolivia, or be it in Iran or Iraq or Uzbekistan and Russia and China and Hong Kong. People are feeling really that, especially since the financial crisis that we've had in 2006, 2007, I think more and more people are starting to feel that whilst banks were too big to fail, they are too small to matter. And they haven't seen any progress. The first step is at the polls. You've seen the Brexit, you've seen the US elections, and in many other countries that has played out as well, perhaps less attention because not English speaking, but you see it across the world. And as populism or nationalism and all that isn't really addressing the real issues, I would argue making it worse, what you now see is people going increasingly into the streets. You know, if you're in France or in any other country, the middle class is being eroded. They haven't seen any improvements in the last 30, 40 years. The same in the US. If you then add the cost of healthcare, education, or housing, which has gone up, you could argue that people are actually worse off. In a country like the US, 80 million people are $400 away from the poverty line. All what needs to happen is their car break down when they go to work or a medical emergency in their family, and frankly, they're toast. And they end up in the streets of Los Angeles and Seattle, and that's exactly what is happening.
Is that a problem the private sector can
Absolutely,
solve?
because, you know, if you're in a consumer goods business like Unilever, but it would be for every business, you know, people say, yeah, but the US economy is growing 2 to 3%. Well, if the 2 to 3% is growing, but all the money goes to a few billionaires, they're not going to wash their hair more often or eat more food off their plates. So you see an erosion of these markets. You know, business cannot really benefit from societies that don't quite function. And the worst thing that can happen over time when you erode the middle class is actually you erode democracy, and that is what we're starting to see. And if we erode democracy, we erode quite a lot of things in humanity that makes this world function, and we should be very mindful of that.
Yeah.
And we have a role to play. And frankly, our employees expect us to play that role. You know, 85% of the employees in their companies expect their CEOs to speak up and be part of these societal issues.
They demand it.
They demand, and if they know what you see is a totally new phenomena, that they're willing to walk out. I mean, who would have ever thought that your Google employees or Facebook or Amazon employees by the thousands are walking out of their companies because they disagree with positions that the management takes? And you know, if you see that on average, the engagement, if you buy into an engagement score of people that go to work, is 13%. So here we are all going to work for these wonderful institutions we all represent. And at the end, only 13% of the people are engaged. There's a significant mismatch between individual values and purpose and what these companies are actually delivering. Yeah. And if you can match those, you're in a very sweet spot that not only gives you higher employee satisfaction, but certainly good results over time.
As CEO of Unilever, you were at the vanguard of this movement of corporate leaders paying more attention to these issues. But in August, you saw the Business Roundtable in the US adopt a change in its statement of corporate purpose to put stakeholders on an equal footing with shareholders. What did you think of that action?
Well, I think it's positive indeed because it's going in the right direction. It's a small step, and I'm sure there was a lot of discussion, and even then some of the companies didn't feel comfortable to signing it. But at least it has started the debate again in the US, which is a good thing. It has started the debate around shareholder primacy and the Friedman theory, which I think has proven to be quite destructive for these global economies. And it has started the debate again of a different...
Friedman theory being shareholder
primacy
only.
And it has started the debate again of the role and responsibilities of these individual or collective companies at a time that we see difficulties in global governance or in local governance, if you want to. So it's a good thing, but it's only a good thing if it gets translated into specific action and is followed up with some real things. So, you know, the world is long on words and short on actions, and I think a lot of people will be watching what these companies then are actually doing. And the jury is out on that.
Do you feel like we're at a tipping point among corporate leaders on these issues?
Well, we are on a tipping point on a macro level because we're at the point right now that we're putting the future of humanity at risk. We're playing with the planetary boundaries, climate change increasingly playing havoc, the increasing income inequality that is taking place. Last year, just as a fact, was the first year in the history of mankind that the bottom 3.8 billion people in this world saw their net combined wealth go down by 11%. These are the poorest people in the world. Whilst the billionaires saw their net wealth go up by 900 billion again last year, 2.5 billion a day. Just taking that money that the billionaires got more in wealth increase would have put all the 246 million children in school that are currently out of school, would have prevented the 5 million children that die before the age of 5 from dying. So when the poor get poorer, we have a problem in this world. And I think a lot of the CEOs are starting to realize that. They're seeing the unintended consequences of that played out at the polls, played out in the streets, and it's just not good. There's no business case in enduring poverty. So they want to be part of the solution and undoubtedly do a lot individually in their companies. But that's leading to marginal change. We really need to get now to being a little bit more uncomfortable, being a little bit more business unusual, and that requires this collective courage that Imagine is focused on by providing that neutral space and bringing these CEOs together.
Let me do a little bit of history here. Take you back 2 years ago. You're CEO of Unilever. Kraft Heinz comes in and says, we're going to take over. We can do a better job getting, you know, your returns to shareholders haven't been quite up to snuff. We can do a better job. How did you
Well, first of all, this is where journalism gets a little sloppy because we have a 300% return on invested capital. We run it at a 300% shareholder return.
But even you said at that time, we have to do better.
Well, because you use these moments to rally the organization to stay competitive. But we were outperforming the industry by a factor of 2. We had 10 years of top and bottom line growth. I even explained to Warren Buffett that we had a higher shareholder return than him during my tenure, and that we were running this business slightly better than he could ever run it. So there was no reason for that. But you see...
So why did they do it?
Because you have two conflicting systems working today in this world that are both legal, but one is focused on the billions of people that need to be served, which tends to be Unilever's model. We focus on the stakeholders, the reason for being as a company, making their lives better, and by doing so, our shareholders will benefit. That system has proven to be valid. The 300% shareholder return, outperforming our industry, the markets, is pretty good. I have a hard time explaining to my 92-year-old mother that a 300% shareholder return over 10 years is not more than you should be really expecting.
And Kraft Heinz, by the way.
And Kraft Heinz is a total private equity model run for a few billionaires. So it's the billionaires against the billions. And I'd rather go through life being a billionaire by helping billions of people than being a billionaire by having $1 billion in money. And our system is one of driving value through values, and their system is entirely focused on this short-term value creation. And it would be good to write history 2 years later, where you see the Kraft Heinz stock down 50% and the Unilever stock up 70% over that period. So all of a sudden, a lot of the shareholders who actually probably the majority would have stayed on our side, but a lot more are happy now. But when you have fund managers that get rewarded on a quarterly basis, and all of a sudden someone comes in with financial maguya to leverage up your company 7 times and pays a 17% premium, then the greed takes over. And a lot of these fund managers don't want to miss that opportunity. And all of a sudden, even the BlackRocks, you see half of them who say they're long-term investors, they love what you're doing, they think it's great the contributions you're making for all of your stakeholders, and that you're creating a world that we can all retire in the future. When the 17% is hanging, you know, dangled in front of you, lots of them don't want to miss that opportunity because it's related to their paycheck. So
let me just stop here for a second because we only have a few minutes left. Does anybody have a question they're dying to ask Paul Polman? This is your opportunity right now. If not, I have a lot more to ask. Do I see someone out there? All right.
Which means broad agreement. That's how I...
Yeah, no, you've convinced them. But how do you change that system? How do you change those short-term financial incentives?
So our premise is the following. People are not bad people. You never meet a CEO who wants more unemployment, more people going to bed hungry, more climate change. It just doesn't exist. Yet collectively, we don't arrive at it. So why is that the case? Because we're operating in boundaries that drive our behavior. For example, in Unilever, if I would reward our salespeople for the number of orders they write, they're going to write a lot of orders, but they will be very small. If I'm going to reward our salespeople on, let's say, the customer service, they're going to exhibit quite a different behavior. So we need to change our boundaries that drive our behavior. What are the boundaries that drive our behavior? First, we need to put some value on natural capital. So that would, for example, be a price on carbon. Capitalism is not bad, but capitalism right now is only chartered to optimize the return on financial capital. If we could include social and environmental capital, then capitalism works pretty well. And in the countries that are already more moving in that direction, they're pretty competitive.
Can you do it on if the U.S. chooses to pull out of Paris and not go that direction? Can other countries still do it?
Well, even in the US, you now have 8,000 states, subnational level, cities that are saying we're staying because they understand it's the future, not the past. They understand they need to be competitive. They see the benefits. You know, when you have California burning, when your forests become carbon emitters, when the North Pole is, is on fire, when the permafrost is melting and releasing methane, which is 25% more potent, 25 times more potent. Fortunately, you have a lot of CEOs that say, hey, I cannot build a business in societies that are failing. I need to ensure that I don't internalize these costs of climate change and stay competitive. From an innovation point of view, from a financial market demand point of view, from the citizens of this world looking for that, they want to be part of it. So even though the US might go out of the Paris Agreement, they're actually running ahead based on the sheer forces of economics and common sense. Yeah. Where the US forces missed this, they've played a key role, especially John Kerry at that time, and to a certain extent Obama, who was your president, in ensuring that other countries were doing their part. So they enrolled without naming them all, but India became a little bit more aggressive. Saudi was not boycotting and others, and that force is missing. And when you have that moral force missing, yeah, you're pushing a little bit more, have to push a little bit harder to do that. And my argument is very simple. We cannot sit here and analyze these politicians and be cynical. When they fall short of delivery, industry. It's us in the private sector with the enormous resources that we have and the enormous potential that we need to help de-risk that political process to move it forward.
Yeah. Paul Pullman, fascinating conversation. Amazing what the challenge you're taking on. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for the opportunity.